The grand ballroom of the Chantilly Hotel was buzzing with a low, expensive hum. It was the kind of sound that only happens when you put 300 of the city's wealthiest people in one room, mixing the clinking of crystal glasses with the soft rustle of silk dresses and the low murmur of important conversations. The lights were dim just enough to make the chandeliers sparkle like stars, and everything smelled of roses and rich food. But for Julian Vance, the CEO of Vantage Industries, there was a knot in his stomach that nothing could untie. He stood near the heavy velvet curtains at the side of the stage, checking his gold watch for the 10th time in 5 minutes. The second hand seemed to be moving too fast, mocking him. This wasn't just a dinner party, it was the most critical fundraising night of the year. He had spent months planning this, pulling strings, and inviting the biggest donors in the country. The goal was to raise millions for the new City Children's Hospital, a project that was very close to his heart. But tonight wasn't going according to plan. 30 minutes ago, the perfect evening had cracked. The event coordinator, a nice woman named Mrs. Gable who usually looked like she had everything under control, came rushing toward him with her face pale as a sheet. She was nearly out of breath. She had just received a phone call that changed everything. The famous pianist, a man known all over the world for his beautiful playing, had suddenly fallen ill. It was bad food poisoning, and he was currently in an ambulance on his way to the hospital. Obviously, he could not play. Julian felt the blood drain from his face. He looked out at the crowd. They were finishing their appetizers. In 20 minutes, the main program was supposed to start. The opening act wasn't just music, it was the mood setter. It was supposed to make the guests feel emotional and generous before the speeches began. Without that music, there would be a gap. A giant, awkward, empty gap in the middle of the room. He turned to Mrs. Gable. "Can we get a band-aid recording anything?" "I've already called everyone," she whispered, looking close to tears herself. "The backup DJ is stuck in traffic because of the rain. The speakers for a recorded track are set up for the live piano, and the sound engineer says switching the audio setup now would take an hour. We're stuck, Julian. We have nothing." Julian looked at the stage. There, in the center spotlight, sat the grand Steinway piano. It was a magnificent instrument, black and shiny, looking like a sleeping beast. But it was silent. It looked lonely sitting there without a player. He could feel the panic rising in his chest. If the energy in the room died now, the donations would suffer. People would start checking their phones or leaving early. The magic of the night would be broken. He watched the guests for a moment. They were laughing, eating, and drinking. They had no idea that behind the curtain, the team was falling apart. Julian took a deep breath, trying to calm his racing heart. He remembered the hard work his mother had put into helping others when he was a boy. He remembered why he built this company in the first place. He wasn't going to let a sick musician ruin a chance to help sick children. He had to do something. He straightened his tie. He smoothed down his jacket. He walked over to the podium where the microphone was waiting. He wasn't a performer, and he certainly wasn't a musician, but he was the CEO. It was his job to solve problems, no matter how unexpected they were. He decided to take a risk. Maybe, just maybe, in a room full of smart, talented, and successful people, someone could step up. Julian stepped out from behind the curtain. The spotlight hit him, and the murmur of the crowd faded away. He walked to the center of the stage, his shoes clicking on the wooden floor. He forced a warm, confident smile onto his face, hiding the stress he felt. He tapped the microphone to make sure it was on. A sharp thump echoed through the room, making a few people jump. "Good evening, everyone," Julian said, his voice booming through the speakers. "Thank you all for being here tonight. It means the world to me, and I know it means the world to the families we are trying to help." He paused, looking around the room. The guests smiled back at him, waiting for the speech to begin. They didn't know what was coming. Julian took another breath and decided to be honest, but with a twist. "As you know," he continued, gesturing to the beautiful piano behind him, "we had a very special performance planned to open our night. Unfortunately, life has a way of surprising us. Our talented pianist is very sick and couldn't be here tonight. But, we still have this beautiful instrument, and we still have this beautiful room." He laughed a little, trying to keep the mood light. "I know that many of you in this room are successful business owners, doctors, and leaders. But I also know that many of you have hidden talents. We have a stage, we have a piano, and we have 10 minutes before the dinner service ends. So, I have a question for you." The room was dead silent now. Everyone was looking at Julian, wondering where he was going with this. He looked out at the sea of faces, the serious men in tuxedos, the elegant women in jewelry. He knew this was a long shot. Asking a CEO to play the piano was like asking a fish to ride a bicycle. But he had to try. "Does anyone here know how to play?" Julian asked, his voice echoing off the walls. "If you can play even a little bit, come up here and help us out. Can anyone play the piano?" For a moment, there was complete silence. You could hear a pin drop. People looked at each other, then quickly looked away. Nobody wanted to make a fool of themselves in front of 300 people. A few people chuckled nervously, a waiter dropped a spoon in the back, and the clink sounded incredibly loud. Julian waited. 5 seconds passed. 10 seconds passed. The silence was getting heavier and heavier, pressing down on the stage. He felt his hope sinking. He was about to have to laugh it off and start a boring speech to fill the time. But then, from the very back of the ballroom, in the shadows near the kitchen doors, a small voice cut through the tension. It wasn't loud, but it was clear. Julian turned his head, squinting against the lights to see who had spoken. The entire room turned to look. "I can play." The voice didn't just speak, it seemed to float across the sea of expensive tables and land right in the center of the stage. It was a small voice, high and clear, but it carried a surprising amount of confidence. For a second, nobody moved. The waiters froze in place, and the guests stopped sipping their soup, their forks hovering halfway to their mouths. It was such an unexpected sound that it took everyone a moment to process what had just happened. Julian Vance stood at the microphone, blinking against the harsh spotlight that was shining in his eyes. He leaned forward slightly, shielding his eyes with his hand, trying to see past the first few rows of tables. The room was enormous, filled with shadows and dim candlelight, so he couldn't see who had spoken. All he saw was a sea of confused faces turning their heads toward the back of the hall. "Who said that?" Julian asked into the microphone, his tone curious and playful. He was honestly just relieved that someone had spoken at all. Even if it was a heckler, it was better than that terrible, suffocating silence. "Don't be shy. We need a hero tonight." Slowly, the crowd began to part near the double doors at the far end of the ballroom. Those doors led to the kitchens and the service corridors, usually off limits to the guests. Standing there, looking very small and very out of place, was a little girl. She couldn't have been more than 7 or 8 years old. She wasn't wearing a fancy ball gown like the other children in the room. Instead, she wore a simple, clean dress that looked like it had been ironed many times, with a small white ribbon in her hair. Near the girl, a woman in a hotel uniform dropped a tray of empty glasses with a loud crash. It was the girl's mother. She worked as a server at the event, and she had stepped out of the kitchen for just a moment to check on her daughter, who was supposed to be sitting quietly on a crate in the hallway doing her homework. The mother's face turned a shade of white that matched the tablecloths. She rushed forward, her hands shaking, terrified that her daughter was about to ruin everything. "I am so sorry," the mother stammered, looking around at the guests who were now staring. She tried to grab the girl's hand to pull her back into the shadows. She didn't mean to interrupt. "We are leaving right now." But the little girl didn't move. She gently pulled her hand away from her mother's grip and took a step forward. She looked up at the stage with big, serious eyes. "I said I can play," she repeated, louder this time. Her voice echoed slightly in the huge room. A low ripple of whispers went through the crowd. Some people chuckled awkwardly. Others looked at their watches, wondering if this was some sort of prank the CEO had organized. A few of the older guests frowned, thinking it was rude for a staff member's child to interrupt such a formal occasion. The social divide in the room was visible for everyone to see, a stark contrast between the diamonds and tuxedos and the little girl in her simple dress standing by the kitchen doors. Julian watched this scene unfold with fascination. He saw the panic in the mother's eyes, and he saw the stubborn determination in the little girl's eyes. It reminded him of himself when he was a boy, scrappy and unwilling to back down even when the odds were against him. He felt a sudden urge to protect that spark of confidence. "Hold on a second," Julian said into the mic. His voice boomed across the room, stopping the whispers instantly. He looked directly at the mother. "It's all right. Don't worry." Then he looked at the little girl. "What is your name, miss?" The girl stood up straighter, smoothing down her dress. "My name is Maya," she said. "Well, Maya," Julian said, leaning on the podium and smiling warmly. "You heard the challenge. I asked if anyone could play, and you were the only one brave enough to say yes. That takes guts. Do you really know how to play this thing, or are you just teasing an old man?" The audience laughed, but the mood was shifting. It was no longer stiff and awkward. People were leaning in, interested to see what would happen. This was better than a speech. Maya nodded her head solemnly. "I play every day. My teacher says I have a gift." Julian glanced at Mrs. Gable, the event planner, who was standing in the wings with her hands over her mouth. She looked terrified that the child would damage the priceless piano. Julian just winked at her. He didn't care about the piano, he cared about the energy in the room. He needed a miracle, and maybe, just maybe, this was it. "Well, we can't argue with the teacher," Julian said. He turned to the audience. "Ladies and gentlemen, it looks like we have our volunteer." He walked to the edge of the stage, where the stairs were. "Come on up, Maya. Let's see what you can do." The walk from the back of the room to the stage felt like a mile long. Maya took a deep breath and began to walk. Her mother wanted to run after her, to scoop her up and hide, but Julian held up a hand to the security guards who were stepping forward. He wanted to see this. As Maya walked down the center aisle, the guests turned in their chairs to watch. The contrast was striking. She walked past tables laden with gold-rimmed plates and centerpieces of expensive roses. She walked past men with Rolexes and women with designer handbags. She walked with her head held high, her eyes fixed on the shiny black piano waiting for her on the stage. She didn't look at the food, she didn't look at the jewelry. She only had eyes for the music. A few people smiled kindly at her as she passed. An older woman with silver hair reached out and gently patted Maya's shoulder, whispering, "Good luck, sweetheart." Someone else started clapping slowly, a rhythm of encouragement. One by one, others joined in until there was a soft, rhythmic clapping filling the room. It wasn't the polite applause you hear at the opera, it was warmer, more human. It was the sound of 300 people rooting for the underdog. When Maya finally reached the stage stairs, they were much higher than she expected. She stood at the bottom, looking up. Julian walked over and extended his hand. His large, manicured hand looked enormous next to her small, calloused fingers. He helped her climb the steep stairs, lifting her up the last step. Standing on the stage, Maya looked tiny. The piano was nearly as tall as she was. The bench was too high, and her feet wouldn't touch the pedals. She looked like a doll placed next to a giant piece of furniture. "You sure you can reach?" Julian asked, kneeling down so he was face to face with her. "We can get a pillow if you need a boost." Maya shook her head. "I'm okay," she said. "I practice standing up sometimes at school because I can't reach the pedals there either." Julian's heart melted a little. Here was this little girl, faced with a massive instrument and a room full of strangers, and she was just thinking about how to solve the problem of the pedals. He realized then that he wasn't just stalling for time anymore. He genuinely wanted to hear her play. He felt a strange sense of calm come over him. The panic about the fundraiser, the stress about the money, it all faded away. In that moment, it was just him and a little girl named Maya about to share a song. "All right then," Julian said, standing up and walking back to the microphone stand. He adjusted it so it was out of her way. "The stage is yours, Maya. Show us what you've got." Maya walked over to the bench and climbed up. She had to scoot forward and sit on the very edge to reach the keys comfortably. She flexed her small fingers, stretching them out. The room went completely silent again. The waiters stopped moving. The kitchen staff peeked through the doors. The CEO stood by the curtains, his arms crossed, holding his breath. This was the moment. Would she play a simple nursery rhyme? Would she freeze up, or would she do something else? Maya took a deep breath, closed her eyes for a split second to find the music in her head, and then, she lowered her hands to the keys. Maya sat on the very edge of the large leather bench, her legs dangling high above the floor. She looked incredibly small against the massive black body of the Steinway piano. From where the audience sat, she looked like a little doll who had wandered onto a stage meant for giants. The bench was so high that her toes were inches away from the gold pedals. She didn't seem to mind. She adjusted her posture, squaring her small shoulders, and took a moment to smooth her dress. Then, she raised her hands and hovered her fingers over the keys. The room was still filled with a low buzz of energy. People were whispering to their neighbors, probably thinking this was just a cute joke. The atmosphere was polite but dismissive. Many of the guests were seasoned professionals who were used to seeing the best of the best. They were ready to smile, say "ah," and then go back to their meals. A few men in the front row exchanged knowing glances, placing bets on whether she would play chopsticks or Twinkle Twinkle Little Star. It was all in good fun, but no one expected anything real to happen. Then, Maya's fingers touched the ivory keys. The first sound that rang out wasn't the clumsy, childish banging anyone expected. It was a soft, resonant chord that seemed to hang in the air like morning mist. It was rich and full, with a depth that didn't match the size of the hands that produced it. The people who were whispering suddenly stopped. A man who was reaching for his wine glass froze, his hand hovering in mid-air. Without a sheet of music in front of her, Maya began to play. She didn't start with a simple nursery rhyme. She launched directly into the melody of Clair de Lune by Claude Debussy. It is a piece of music that is incredibly difficult, not because it is fast, but because it requires a touch that is gentle and full of emotion at the same time. It is the sound of moonlight reflecting on water. At first, the crowd was just confused. They looked at each other, eyebrows raised, wondering if this was actually happening. But as the melody continued, weaving its way through the high notes, the confusion turned into shock. The little girl wasn't just hitting the right notes, she was playing with a feeling that was hauntingly beautiful. Her left hand played a rolling rhythm like waves, while her right hand danced lightly on top, picking out the sweet, sad melody. Maya's eyes were closed. Her face, usually bright and smiling, was serious and peaceful. She wasn't thinking about the 300 people watching her. She wasn't thinking about the fancy lights or the CEO standing in the shadows. She was somewhere else entirely. To her, the ballroom had disappeared. Perhaps she was imagining the moon rising over the city, or maybe she was remembering the sounds she heard in her dreams. The silence in the room grew deeper and heavier, but it wasn't an uncomfortable silence anymore. It was the kind of silence that happens when people are holding their breath. The waiters, who were usually invisible ghosts moving between tables, stopped moving completely. They stood near the walls, holding trays, completely captivated. The kitchen staff had crept out of the swinging doors and stood in the back, their chins resting on the folded arms of the buffet tables, watching in awe. Julian Vance stood to the side of the stage, partially hidden by the velvet curtains. He had crossed his arms over his chest, a subconscious gesture of protection. He watched Maya's hands moving across the keys. They were so small that she had to stretch her fingers to reach some of the chords, leaning her whole body into the instrument to get the sound she wanted. It was a physical effort for her, but she made it look effortless. He looked out at the audience. The change was undeniable. The skepticism was gone. The masks of sophistication that the wealthy guests wore had slipped. You could see genuine emotion on their faces. An elderly woman near the front had a handkerchief pressed to her lips, her eyes glistening. A tough-looking businessman in a sharp tuxedo was staring at Maya with his mouth slightly open, his dessert forgotten in front of him. The music was washing away the barriers that usually exist in a room like this. It didn't matter that Maya was the daughter of a kitchen worker. It didn't matter that she was wearing a cheap dress. For these few minutes, the only thing that mattered was the art she was creating. The piano, usually a tool for showing off skill, had become a vessel for storytelling. Maya was telling a story of innocence and beauty, and everyone was listening. As the song moved toward its climax, Maya's movements became more expressive. She swayed slightly with the rhythm, her body flowing with the music. She hit a high, crystal clear note that rang out like a bell in the quiet room. It was a sound that pierced right through the heart. Julian felt a chill run down his spine and a sudden tightness in his throat. He hadn't expected this. He had expected a cute distraction to fill the time. Instead, this little girl was giving a performance that rivaled professionals he had paid thousands of dollars to see. He thought about his own life. He thought about the stress of the stock market, the competition, the endless meetings. He thought about how complicated adults made the world. And here was this child, just sitting at a piano, playing something pure and simple. It was a reminder of everything he had lost touch with. It was a reminder of the magic that exists in the world if you just stop to listen for it. Maya did not rush. She let the music breathe. She held the final notes, letting them fade slowly into the air until the sound was so soft you could almost hear your own heartbeat. Then, her hands dropped to her lap. She opened her eyes and sat there for a moment, looking at the keys, as if she were waking up from a dream. For 3 full seconds, nobody made a sound. The ballroom was completely still. The grand chandelier overhead seemed to glow brighter in the quiet. It was a moment of absolute suspended animation, where the entire audience was processing what they had just heard. They had come to a gala expecting a show, but they had been given a gift. Julian exhaled a breath he didn't know he was holding. He looked at Maya, who was now turning around on the bench to look for her mother in the crowd. She looked shy again, as if she realized that the magic bubble had burst and she was back in the real world. But the look on her face wasn't fear. It was the look of someone who had done what she was meant to do. The silence that followed Maya's final note was not empty, it was heavy. It hung in the air like a thick fog, filling every corner of the vast ballroom. Usually, after a performance at a gala, there is that split second of polite silence before the obligatory clapping begins. But this was different. This was a silence born of complete shock. 300 people, all of whom were used to being impressed by expensive things, found themselves absolutely stunned by something that was free. Maya sat on the bench, her hands resting in her lap, her small feet swinging gently back and forth. She looked out at the crowd, blinking as the spotlight shone in her eyes. She seemed unaware that she had just done something extraordinary. To her, she had just played a song she liked. Standing in the shadows near the curtain, Julian Vance felt a strange sensation wash over him. It started as a prickle in his nose and quickly moved to his eyes, blurring his vision. He tried to swallow the lump in his throat, but it wouldn't go away. He was the CEO of a massive company. He was used to negotiating multimillion-dollar deals, facing angry board members, and making tough decisions without blinking. He was trained to be steel, to be rock. But here, in the dim light of the stage, he felt his armor crumbling. The melody of Clair de Lune was still echoing in his mind, but it wasn't just the music he was hearing. It was a trigger. As the soft notes faded, they pulled Julian back 30 years into the past. Suddenly, he wasn't in a luxurious hotel anymore. He was a little boy again, sitting in a drafty, cramped apartment on the wrong side of the city. He could smell the old wood and the faint scent of stew cooking on a hot plate. He could see his mother. She was a woman who worked until her back ached and her hands were raw, just to put food on the table. They were poor, poorer than anyone in this room could probably imagine. But they had an old, beat-up piano in the corner that his mother had bought for almost nothing. It was out of tune, and some of the keys stuck when you pressed them. Julian remembered rainy evenings, the kind where the cold leaked through the window frames. His mother would come home exhausted, her coat wet, her spirit tired. But she would sit him on her lap, and she would play that exact song. She would play Clair de Lune on that broken piano, and for those few minutes, the cold apartment would disappear. They would be transported to a place of peace and warmth. Her music was her way of telling him that everything would be okay, that there was beauty in the world even if they couldn't see it right then. The memory was so vivid it hurt. He remembered the safety he felt in her arms, the sound of her humming along with the melody. His mother had passed away many years ago, long before he became successful. He had buried that memory deep under layers of business strategies and market trends. He had forgotten the magic of that simple melody. But hearing Maya play it today, with such pure innocence, brought it all rushing back. He realized that the little girl on the stage wasn't just playing notes, she was channeling the same love and hope his mother had. She was playing for the joy of it, not for money or applause. And in that moment, Julian saw the stark contrast between his life now and his life then. He looked at the expensive diamonds around the necks of the women in the front row, and then he looked at Maya in her simple dress. He knew in his heart who the richer person was. A tear escaped his eye and rolled down his cheek. He quickly wiped it away with the back of his hand, but another one followed. He wasn't embarrassed, though. For the first time in a long time, he felt human. He felt connected to everyone in the room, not because of their status, but because of their shared emotions. Suddenly, a sound broke the spell. It was a sharp intake of breath from someone in the front row, followed by the scrape of a chair against the floor. An elderly man, one of the wealthiest bankers in the city, slowly stood up. He didn't say anything. He just looked at the stage and began to clap. It wasn't a fast, rhythmic clap. It was a slow, deep clap of true respect. Then, a woman near the aisle stood up. Then another. And another. Like a wave rising from the ocean, the audience began to rise to their feet. It started in the front and swept back to the walls of the ballroom. Within seconds, the entire room was standing. The silence was shattered by a roar of applause. It wasn't the polite, obligatory clapping you hear at boring speeches. It was thunderous. It was deafening. People were whistling and cheering. Some were wiping tears from their own eyes, moved by the memory the music had stirred in them or simply by the bravery of the little girl. Julian watched Maya's reaction. She looked out at the wall of standing people, her eyes going wide with surprise. A huge smile broke across her face, transforming her serious expression into pure joy. She gave a small, shy wave, which only made the crowd cheer louder. It was a moment of pure magic, a moment where the barriers of class and age completely dissolved. The cooks from the kitchen were cheering as loud as the executives in the front. Julian knew he had to move. He couldn't just stand there crying in the wings. He took a deep breath, composing himself, and walked out onto the stage. The applause grew even louder as he appeared. He walked over to Maya and bent down, putting one arm around her small shoulders. She leaned into him, trusting and happy. He signaled for the sound engineer to lower the volume on the audience, and slowly, the noise died down enough for him to speak. He kept his arm around Maya. He looked out at the sea of faces. He didn't see donors or clients anymore. He saw people who had just been touched by something real. He leaned into the microphone, his voice slightly shaky but strong. "I have been in this business for 30 years, Julian said, his voice echoing through the room. I have seen stock markets crash and I have seen companies rise. I have made speeches and I have listened to experts. But I have to tell you, I have never, ever been as moved as I am tonight." He paused, looking down at Maya, then back at the crowd. "We came here tonight to talk about helping children. We came here to write checks and talk about strategy. But this little girl just taught us the most important lesson of all. She showed us that talent and passion don't care about how much money you have or where you come from." The room was dead silent again, hanging on his every word. Julian wiped his eyes one last time, not caring if the cameras saw him. "Tonight isn't just about a hospital," he continued, his voice gaining strength. "It is about giving every child the chance to find their voice. It is about making sure that talent, wherever it hides, gets a chance to shine. We almost missed this because of a technical difficulty. But look at what we would have missed. He looked at Maya. Thank you, Maya, he whispered into the mic, loud enough for everyone to hear. You saved the night. You saved us. Then, he turned back to the audience, a look of determination on his face. He was about to make an announcement, a decision that would change the course of Maya's life forever, sparked by the melody that reminded him of his mother's love. He wasn't just a CEO anymore, he was a man with a mission, fueled by a little girl and a piano. Julian looked out at the sea of expectant faces, his hand resting gently on Maya's small shoulder. He could feel her warmth through the fabric of her dress, a tangible reminder of the life and potential standing right next to him. The applause had died down, but the energy in the room had shifted completely. It was no longer a stiff, formal business dinner, it felt like a gathering of friends who had just shared something profound. Julian took a deep breath, steadying his voice. He knew that what he was about to say would change the trajectory of this night, and perhaps, this little girl's life. We came here tonight to write checks for a hospital, Julian began, his voice clear and strong, echoing through the ballroom. And we are going to do that. But listening to Maya play reminded me of something important. A hospital heals the body, but opportunities like this heal the spirit. We cannot let talent like this go unnoticed just because of where someone comes from or what their parents do for a living. He paused for a moment, looking toward the back of the room where Maya's mother was standing. The poor woman was clutching a serving towel to her chest, her eyes wide with disbelief and fear. Julian smiled at her, trying to reassure her without words. Tonight, I am making a promise on behalf of Vantage Industries, Julian announced, raising his free hand slightly. We are not just going to applaud for 2 minutes and forget about this. We are going to invest in the future. Starting tomorrow, Vantage will be providing a full scholarship to the city's top music conservatory for Maya. This will cover her lessons, her music books, her travel, and her tuition, all the way until she is 18 years old. A gasp went through the room. It wasn't a polite gasp, it was a genuine shock. A full scholarship to a conservatory like that was worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. It was the kind of opportunity that musicians dreamed of. Julian continued, his eyes shining. And we don't want to stop there. We are also going to donate a new grand piano to Maya's elementary school, so other children can find the same joy she has found. We want to make sure that the next Maya doesn't have to wait for a gala to be heard. For a second, there was silence as the guests processed what they had just heard. Then, the room erupted. It wasn't just clapping this time, people were standing on their chairs. The man in the front row was shouting bravo. A woman near the back was wiping tears with a linen napkin, nodding her head furiously. The sound was deafening, a wave of pure joy and approval. But the most beautiful reaction was happening at the back of the room. Maya's mother had covered her mouth with her hands. Her knees seemed to give way, and 2 other servers rushed to hold her up. She was crying, but they weren't tears of fear or embarrassment. They were tears of relief and overwhelming gratitude. Years of worrying about how to give her daughter a better life, of working double shifts to pay for second-hand instruments, were washed away in that single moment. She looked up at the stage, her eyes locking with Julian's, and he gave her a small, respectful nod. She didn't need to say thank you, her eyes said it all. Julian leaned down and whispered in Maya's ear. Do you know what a scholarship is, Maya? Maya looked up at him, shaking her head shyly. Is it like a gold star? Julian laughed, a warm, genuine sound that the microphone picked up. It's better than a gold star, he told her. It means you get to keep playing music for as long as you want, and we will make sure you have the best teachers in the world to help you. Maya's eyes went round as saucers. Really, even when I'm old like 9? Even when you're 10 and 11 and way past that, Julian promised. The atmosphere in the room had transformed entirely. The earlier awkwardness and stiffness were gone, replaced by a sense of community and shared purpose. The guests, who had arrived expecting a night of networking and social obligation, now felt personally invested. One by one, people started pulling out their checkbooks. They weren't donating because it was good for their public image. They were donating because they felt moved. They wanted to be part of this story. The event coordinator, Mrs. Gable, appeared at the side of the stage, looking stunned but happy. She held up a clipboard showing the current donation total. In just 10 minutes, the amount had doubled what they had raised in the entire previous year. The power of a single moment of authenticity had achieved more than months of planning ever could. Julian signaled for the music to start up again, a lively jazz band this time, but nobody was really in the mood to leave the dance floor just yet. They gathered around the stage in small groups, talking excitedly about the performance. The barriers that usually separated the important guests from the staff had dissolved. People were calling waiters over by name, asking them questions, shaking their hands. The kitchen staff, who usually remained invisible, were being treated like celebrities because one of their own had shone so brightly. Eventually, Maya had to get off the stage so the band could set up. Julian walked her down the stairs and back through the crowd. This time, the path was like a gauntlet of kindness. People reached out to pat her on the back, to high-five her, or to slip a dollar bill into her hand as a tip, even though she wasn't asking for one. She accepted it all with a shy smile, clutching the money in her small fist. When they finally reached the back of the room, her mother was waiting. She swept Maya up into a huge hug, spinning her around. The sight of the mother in her uniform holding her daughter, the girl in the simple dress who had conquered the room, was the picture of love and triumph. Julian stood back, watching them, not feeling like an intruder, but feeling privileged to witness it. As the night went on, the guests filtered out, but the mood remained high. People left the hotel not just talking about business deals, but talking about the little girl and the piano. They left feeling lighter, happier, and more connected to the world around them. Julian was the last to leave. He walked out of the ballroom and stopped for a moment in the hallway. The hotel was quiet now, the cleaning crew beginning to clear the tables. He looked back at the empty stage. The grand piano was still there, gleaming under the lights. It wasn't lonely anymore. It had been played by someone who loved it, someone who didn't care about the price tag or the prestige. He smiled to himself, thinking about his mother. He hoped she was watching from wherever she was. He felt a sense of peace he hadn't felt in years. The fundraiser had been a massive success, the money for the hospital was secured, and a star had been born. But more importantly, a little girl had been given a chance, and a room full of powerful people had been reminded that magic often comes from the places we least expect. As Julian walked out into the cool night air, he buttoned his coat. He knew that tomorrow would be back to the spreadsheets and the board meetings. But the melody of Claire de Lune would stay with him. It would remind him to always look for the hidden talent, to always listen for the quiet voices, and to never be afraid to ask a simple question: can anyone play? Because sometimes, the answer can change everything.